But anyway, last week, I was trying to review Al Gore's new movie, and everybody's talking about, oh, these hurricanes, it's proof of global warming. It's proof. Well, no, actually, it doesn't work that way. There's, for one thing, we're not having any global warming. And for another thing, you can't really point to a hurricane here and a hurricane there during our history of the last 20, 30, 50 years, however long, maybe 100 years, however long we've been paying attention to such things as hurricanes, and say, oh, look, there's a trend. Look at it, there's a trend. It's been getting more political. No, actually, we've had pretty quiet years lately, and every once in a while we'll have some fluke year where you have like 10 or 12 hurricanes, and we've had years where there have been no hurricanes. So there is no pattern of an increase. So I was kind of like getting on the subject about Al Gore's stupid movie, The Inconvenient Sequel, Truth to Power. And I only mentioned a little bit of it. I ran out of time. And now I've got a little bit more time. Let me tear Al Gore a new butthole, shall I? Shall we? Yeah, let's do it. He was yelling like an evangelical preacher in this new thing here. You know, basically bragging about his accomplishments and everything that's occurred and whatever. But here's the point that really isn't brought up in this movie, is that everything he predicted would happen in this first convenient lie movie didn't happen. 10 years after the release of his Inconvenient Truth, none of the dire climate change predictions have come to pass. He said the Arctic would melt and the polar bears would all die off, and the Arctic didn't melt. As a matter of fact, there's an article I just saw a little while ago before I went to air talking about the ice is thicker than it's been in I don't know how many years. I'll pull it up here in a second and tell you about it, but it's like it predicted that the Arctic would become ice-free, it hasn't, within the next decade, so that polar bears would begin drowning. They haven't. Both claims were lies. In the mid to late 2000s, Gore repeatedly predicted the ice-free Arctic Ocean was coming soon to a theater near you, that it would be ice-free and we could have all kind of shipping lanes going through there, but it's not. I mean, a little bit in the summertime, but even now, even right now, the ice is at a record levels, especially for this time of year is what I mean. I mean, it goes up and down as the year goes through. It has seasons, just like the rest of the planet. But the ice is thicker. His fortune-telling was wrong. By 2014, Arctic ice had grown thicker and covered a greater area than it did when he made his prediction. It fluctuates with the seasons. Ships get trapped in the ice. In the wintertime, a ship will get trapped. They'll get all frozen in, and they'll send out an icebreaker. And then that icebreaker will get stuck before it gets to that ship. So they'll send another icebreaker, and then you'll have 3 ships in a row frozen out there in the Arctic. It happens more often than you think. And then they got to just sit there. They leave. They come get helicopters, take them out of there, maybe leave a skeleton crew on there, but they got to wait until the spring thaw. The Greenland Ice Sheet he was talking about would be gone. No, it's growing at a record rate. The glaciers grow at record speeds. They break off into the sea, resulting in icebergs at record amounts, forcing ships to steer 400 miles south to avoid the icebergs. And that's not a sign that they're melting. That's a sign that the glaciers are growing. There's 250,000 glaciers on this planet, and the vast majority of them are growing. And the polar bears? Oh, the poor polar bears! Oh, the Canadian scientists that study these guys, they debunked the notion polar bears are currently being depopulated by the global warming. It's Lakehead University up in Canada. They find no evidence polar bears are currently threatened by warming. Scientists have increasingly questioned these alarmists that say there are and tell you that there are way more polar bears alive today than there were 40 years ago. These polar bears, they're big furry creatures. They can hang. They're tough. I'm telling you, they're more resilient to changing levels of sea ice than anybody previously believed. And that's because they've been studying them now, they realize these are some big healthy creatures. They're doing fine. They have numerous healthy populations in that area, and they're thriving. They said that the bears are going to die because of the lack of sea ice. Well, there's not a lack of sea ice, so it's proven to be poppycock. And just a few thousand years ago, you see, right now we're in this warm period. It lasts approximately 10,000 years between glaciations. And during this 10,000 years, we're at the end of it, by the way. It's over. But about 3,000 years ago and beyond, it was much hotter than it is now. And yes, there were periods in which the North Pole, the Arctic, was free of ice. And they did fine. They did fine. Because, you know, there's land over there. You got northern Russia, you got Canada area. Polar bear, just go over there. So, polar bears have likely survived these past ice-free periods happy and healthy. There's no evidence of large-scale marine life extinctions in the Arctic in the past 1.5 million years, according to people who study this sort of thing, despite the Arctic going through prolonged periods with no summer ice cover. After this movie came out, no more drowned polar bears were documented. No more bears than normal starved to death. There was no unusual spikes in cannibalism occurring, as he was saying, oh, they're starving, they're eating each other. There's not a single polar bear population wiped out of all the little population, little groups. And another prediction that he made in his Convenient Lie movie was that Mount Kilimanjaro would be snow-free within the decade. But in fact, Kilimanjaro snow hasn't disappeared. It didn't do it. It's, for one thing, isn't it in South Africa down there? It gets pretty cold. Right now it's cold as heck down there because they're in their winter. So the ecologists that monitor Kilimanjaro, they say it's not even close to being gone. It may have shrunk a little, but ecologists were confident it would be around for the foreseeable future. It's the tallest mountain in Africa. This is a huge mountain. It doesn't even know we're here. We have no impact on it. We're not even ants to that mountain. It's a giant mountain. He also forecasted that storms would begin occurring more often and at higher intensities. And okay, I get it. We just had a hurricane and now we've got another hurricane coming in. But these, like I said, these are rare. You can't say that there's been an increase because there has not been an increase. But because overall these are random. This is just a random occurrence. And nobody's going to buy into that. Just do a little bit more research on what's going on in the world is all I'm asking. His claim is more hype than actual science, and storms aren't more extreme since 2006. In fact, not even the findings from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that's the IPCC, that's who's in cahoots with him, even they say, nah, it's not happening. It's just not. Back in 2013, it says limited evidence of changes and extremes associated with other climate variables since the mid-20th century. Nothing. Zippity-doo-dah. They also found no significant observed trends in global tropical cyclone frequency over the past century, and no robust trends in annual numbers of tropical storms, hurricanes, and major hurricanes counts have been identified over the past 100 years in the North Atlantic Basin. So yeah, you can't look at these couple of hurricanes we're having now and say, oh, there's your evidence. No. We should have had the evidence after he put out his movie, and we didn't get that evidence. He should probably take these findings seriously since he shared the Nobel Prize in 2007 with the IPCC for the work on global warming. These are his confidants, if you will. There have been increasingly cold winters is what you need to be paying attention to, ladies and germs. There with more and more severe snowstorms. All this year, and for the past 10 years as well, for that matter, we've been hearing from the criminals in the climate mafia that the Arctic is record hot and sea ice is at a record low. In fact, it's been very cold in the Arctic. Summer was short, and there's lots of new ice forming. This summer here, for that area of the world, has been quite short, and it's pretty much ending. There's lots of new ice forming several weeks earlier than normal. The sea ice area is up more than 40% from 5 years ago. No matter what lies they tell you, those are the actual numbers. Although Gore's claims have been thoroughly debunked by a large number of experts, he's been quietly amassing a huge fortune himself based on the climate change scam. He was worth $700,000 back when he ran for president, back in 2000. And now that they've made him the leader of the global warming movement, he's worth over $200 million. Oh yeah, It's good to be liar for global warming. Gore and the former chief of Goldman Sachs Asset Management, they made nearly $218 million in profits between 2008 and 2011. There's a growing consensus that Al Gore has perpetrated massive fraud against the American public, and many believe that he should be held accountable. Over 30,000 scientists, including a top-tier leader of the science community, as well as the founder of the Weather Channel, have come forward to sue Al Gore for fraud. Al Gore has made massive profits in the promotion of the global warming mythology, and he played a key role in getting the cap-and-trade legislation passed. And that's what this is all about. Cap-and-trade, babies. Cap-and-trade. This is how the Rothschilds siphon money out of every country in the world. They use another process, not just the EPA and just taxation that they suck through their central banks, because they've set up their central banks, and they've been raping and pillaging all over the world. But this system they're so happy with this system, this cap and tax, global warming fraud. It makes it just like a river flow out of every country into their central banks. And they're happy. They're like little pieces of shit. That's what I'm saying. They're having a good time. But this lawsuit, perhaps this lawsuit will finally give the thousands of dissenting scientists a voice again. I don't know. I lost track of that, whether or not that lawsuit had any effect. But when you're dealing with courts that are on the take, it's unlikely that we're ever going to get justice on any subject at all. So let's see, the single most criticized event in the Inconvenient Sequel was described thusly. In that clip, Al Gore then shows Superstorm Sandy, footage of water flooding lower Manhattan, because that's what he said. He said soon Manhattan will be underwater. So he was able to say, look at that superstorm. It brought up a storm surge, that brought in this flood of water and a lot of rain, and including the memorial site. And a quote from Governor Andrew Cuomo blaming climate change to prove true Gore's claim from 11 years ago. But his original prediction was not about extenuating circumstances of a storm like Sandy slamming into New York or any storm surge at all. That's not what he was talking about. He was talking about the sea level rising. It would be generated, as he predicted, from the ice melt in the Greenland and Antarctica. And, he said that would do it. But the latest maps show that Greenland still has ice 11 years after Gore's prediction of catastrophic melt due to global warming. And as for Antarctica, I remember reading a report that the penguins have to march I don't remember how many more miles. It's been a while since I saw that article, but they've got to march an awful lot longer. And they do that migration thing. They do that thing where they go down to the water and then they come back and they have the eggs, and it's a stupid cycle. I don't see how they survive. Watch that movie about the March of the Penguins. It's a drinking game. Every time that whoever the narrator is, every time he says the word survive, then you take a drink and you'll pass out before the movie ends. And now it's time for the Dalton Minimum Update. About 500 years ago, they had this thing called the Little Ice Age, and it was called the Little Ice Age, but they refer to that as the Maunder Minimum, which actually speaks to a season of the sun in which the sunspots pretty much go away. Yes, people were actually looking at the sun back then. I don't know how magical. They used magic, I think, and they would be able to see that there was a correlation between sunspots diminishing and energy output of the sun. So this new one that we're going into now, which is bringing on our next little ice age, is called the Dalton Minimum. Some people intermix those two terms. It's not that important. Just know that they've already been noticing, in the last years, that the sunspots are starting to soften out, and they've been able to say, okay, we're going into another little ice age, and it's pretty much going on. So they had this 2-week long period of a blank sun recently that they had no sunspots observed, which they called that was the end of cycle 24 of the sun. These cycles last about 12 years, give or take a few years, and this cycle is the weakest, having fewer sunspots since the beginning of the last century. These sunspots are indicators of the strength of the sun's magnetic shield, if you will. This shield envelops and protects all of us planets in the solar system. Our mother sun shields us with her magnetic shield. So, and it shields us from cosmic rays. These cosmic rays, you see, there's like these proton particles coming out. It's like a rainstorm or a shotgun blasts of these machine guns, if you will, of these proton particles. It's kind of like a galactic particle beam rainstorm that never stops, if you will. Anyway, these particles, you see, they get through when the sun is quiet, and they smack the water vapor in our air, creating aerosols, like fog or steam, you see. And if anything is making us have more rain, because that's what happens at the beginning of these little ice ages, if you will. See, there's too much rain, and the rainy season begins too early, and it lasts too long, and the crops fail. And that was a large part of the problem during the Little Ice Age. Not only did the Thames freeze over and was incredibly cold, but they weren't able to grow enough food. So people were starving, they were eating their own children. It was a horrible experience. So yeah, that would be more likely what's causing, if you can say there's a causation of these hurricanes that we've had lately, is that all of a sudden the sun's gotten too quiet, and we're not getting our protection from the cosmic rays, which create more clouds and more rain. And that's how these if you will, these wacky, cuckoo, crazy ice ages begin. We get these clouds, and then we get the rain and the snow, and it's called reflectivity. They reflect the heat, and that cools the planet. And it's a constant recycling of more rain, more clouds, more snow, and that makes, and then the water evaporates out of the oceans, the sea levels drop, and it gets colder and colder and colder, and that's how we go into these things. Reflectivity, boys and girls, is the main driver of temperature on this planet. CO2 and greenhouse gases, they're a non-issue. And that's your lecture on that. Ladies and gentlemen, my show has come to a close. And thank you for tuning in. This is Conspiracy Comedy News, and this is American Freedom Radio. I will see you next week.